and welcome to this TechSec version 0.3 video tutorial, which is the first in a series of video tutorials about the technical section, aka TechSec add-on for Blender. And in this video tutorial I'm just going to cover introduction and installation of TechSec and just give you a little bit of an idea of what it does. Subsequent videos will delve into functionality in a little bit more detail. So as an add-on for Blender, TechSec works with Blender version 2.93, which at the time of making this video is the latest long-term support version of Blender and should be the default version that you download from the Blender website. So once you have Blender 2.93 and you've installed it, then running Blender for the first time will show you a screen very similar to this. 3D viewport, outliner, properties panels, and the animation timeline at the bottom. So I'm just going to go and install TechSec into this kind of default Blender scene. So if I come to Edit, Preferences, and you might be on this button to begin with, but if we click on this Addons button here, this gives us a list of all the add-ons that are currently available. If they're sort of grayed out, they're not currently active. If they have a tick here, then they've been made active and they're live. So I'm going to come to this Install button up here, and with this Install button I can now navigate to find a zip file. And when you download TechSec from the Blender Market, it'll come as a zip file. So I have this TechSec, it might be called something different when you download it, but I have this TechSec zip file here. If I now click Install Add-on, then we should see that the technical section add-on then displays, but it's grayed out because it's not active. So I need to click on that little button there, or that little checkbox there, and the technical section add-on is now live. So I'll just come out of the preferences window. So you won't necessarily see any big difference in the user interface unless you go to two places, which is where the TechSec creates interface elements within Blender. So one is your sidebar, your 3D view sidebar, and you can toggle that on and off with the N key with the mouse over the 3D viewport, or you can click on this little arrow here, and at the bottom or somewhere within this list of tabs you will see TechSec. So at the moment it says no section objects because we haven't created any section objects, but in this panel, and I'll show it sort of filled out in a little bit, this is where we control all the aspects of the 3D view of the sections that we're making. There is another place. So in this Object Properties tab here, in our Properties panels, if we scroll down, we will also see a TechSec section here. And this will control the properties of objects, Blender objects, and how they relate to TechSec and creating technical sections. So, and I'll just say on the point of sort of installation, TechSec does run on Windows OS X and Linux. The TechSec comes with everything you need to run on OS X and Windows, but if you are on Linux, because TechSec uses Cairo, you need to have a Cairo installation on your Linux box. I don't include it for Linux because Cairo is a very common library that gets installed on Linux if you install Inkscape or many other kind of vector graphic applications. So you've probably got Cairo already. But if you get a problem with installation, then just make sure that on Linux you've got a Cairo installation on your Linux box. So I think that's everything to do with installation. Those are the two panels. So let's just do a very quick initial technical section. So I have a default cube here, so we may as well use that, why not? Now this default cube is manifold, which means that every edge is connected to two faces. So it makes a sort of consistent volume. So this makes it appropriate to be something that can cut with the TechSec add-on. So with that cube selected, and in my TechSec section here, I'm going to change geometry from none to cuttable. And we will now see some options for the section that's going to be cut through that object. And I'll go through those in a subsequent video a little bit more. But we also need a section object, something which is going to cut through this cube. So I'm just going to create a plane. And I'm going to label this plane now section. So once I've designated that plane as a section, you'll see two things have happened. One, the TechSec view panel has been populated with options, and the plane has changed size. Now that size change is to do with A3 1 to 20. So in Blender length units, which by default is meters, this plane is now the size of an A3 sheet at a scale of 1 to 20. If I change it to 1 to 10, it gets smaller. If I change it to 1 to 25, it gets bigger. If I change the page size, it changes again. So that plane always relates to scale and page size, at least in terms of most operations. There are exceptions to that, which I'll cover in subsequent videos. So another thing I might do is I'm just going to manipulate my view settings. So with this little triangle here, or this little arrow here, I'm going to change my lighting to flat. I'm going to turn on cavity, going to turn on world for cavity, and turn down the ridge. And I'm going to turn material color to texture. And that's really important for seeing visualizations later on. So those are just, you don't have to do this and you don't have to do this. I just do that by preference, but you do have to do, you have to turn on texture here. So this section plane, I can now manipulate this in the ways that you can manipulate normal Blender geometry. So you can rotate it and you can move it. I'm just going to keep it there for now, just for simplicity's sake. And you'll see that these populations have sort of filled out because we have a cuttable object and we have a section object. And the first option here is to pick the mode. There are three modes in TechSec. SVG, which will just produce SVG files for you with the additional option of creating PNGs and applying them to this plane. We have the scaled option, which is like SVG, but it allows you to do sort of live visualizations, interactive visualizations. And we have the free mode, which is a little bit different. It's not about producing paper output. It's about visualization with Blender, and it gives you more flexibility about the nature of the section planes that you're using when you're doing your section cuts. So I'm just going to stick with scaled at the moment, and I'm going to do a scaled visualization. Now when I click that, it says save the Blender file first, and that is important. So I'm going to save this Blender file. I'm going to call it tut1. Now that's important because if I just come to, so I've saved that file in my Blender 2.93 folder. If I come into that Blender 2.93 folder, I can see I've got my tut1 blend file. Now when I do a section cut, I will also then create a folder in the same place as the file, and that folder will be called the same name as the file. So I've created tut1.blend, and I will have a folder in here called tut1. We might see that in a moment. So now that I've saved the file, I can now do scaled visualization. So you'll see that the plane has gone transparent, and you might see we've got a line here. Now what I'm going to do is, just to make things a little bit clearer, is I'm going to use this option here, hide geometry, and this allows me to hide geometry on one or either side of that section. And stick with outer. So you see, this is basically what the TechSec add-on does. It takes a section plane and it takes cuttable objects, it cuts a plane through that object, and it's now creating an image file which is being applied to this plane that contains that section information. And you can see what I mean if I come to the image editor. You'll see I've got now a PNG file of that section which is being applied to this plane. And if I come to my file browser, you see we've now got a tut1 folder, and we now have the scalable vector graphics version of that section in vector graphic format. And I use Inkscape to view all the SVGs produced by TechSec, because Inkscape sort of respects all the SVG settings and SVG options that TechSec does. Adobe Illustrator, for example, has a bit of a problem with some of the pattern fills. So, so it's, you know, it's all sort of pretty clear. This is all a bit boring, you might argue. It's just a white square with a black edge, but we have options. So with that cuttable object selected, I can change the thickness of the line to sort of standard. TechSec is aimed primarily at architectural visualizations, or it could be used for any sort of engineering technical purpose. So I've got here standard line thicknesses for different architectural renderings. I can change the line color. I can change the line type. I can also change the fill. So I can have, if I want, and I might just increase those hatch lines slightly, I can have lines which can be dashed or they can be full. I can rotate them. I can have poured concrete. Again, scale it, rotate it, offset it. So you'll have those options for all the different pattern fills that you can have, and I've got sort of different line versions and different materials sort of already built into TechSec. If I come over to my cycles rendering engine, then this also appears in cycles. So we can also create templates, and this mode is, because I've got in scaled mode here, this mode is interactive, so I can move my plane around, I can rotate it if I wish. So this is a fully interactive mode, and we can tell that we're in this interactive mode because there's a cancel button down here. So I am going to cancel, come out of that mode, and then the object goes back to the way it was before. Now when you do a section in scaled and in free mode as well, we will create a new collection. We will create TechSec objects, and it will be those that you visualize while we're live. Once we come out of live, this becomes hidden, and the original cube in this case becomes visible again. So that is a very basic introduction. One thing I will say is that do not mess around with your section plane unless you're in free mode. If you're in scaled or SVG mode, if you go and make some sort of crazy changes to this plane, then if we do a scaled visualization, we'll get something wrong. So my recommendation is just create a plane leave the plane alone, and allow the settings here to change the size of that plane. The exception to that is if you're in free mode, where you've got a little bit more flexibility about how you create planes and the shape of the planes that are going to cut sections through your objects. But I will cover that in a subsequent video. So I think for the very basics of just installation, introduction, I think that'll do for now. Okay, thanks for watching.